Thurston from Wrestlenomics is up next, and we're going to follow Brandon with John Pollock from Post Wrestling.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone.
But we can't ignore the math, okay? We can't ignore the data.
Go on Google Trends, type in your name, then type in mine. You're a straight line. I'm a pyramid.
I like the very direct question on that.
Television ratings, downward spiral. Buy rates, plummeting.
The time is now to turn the math around.
You're muted, John. Am I alone here? I'm not sure what's happening. Well, I think John Pollock is not with us at the moment. Oh, maybe he's back now.
I think I'm back.
Okay. Hello, everybody.
Listen, we never accuse ourselves of being professionals around here, but here we are, Pollock and Thurston on Wednesday, May the 15th. Do you know what today is, Brandon?
Today, in fact, is the 20th year since I first had my pro wrestling match.
Wow, really?
Match. Yes. I was not counting down to it or anything, but I looked at the date today and I was like, oh my God. I'm so old now. This is the first time I had a match without not wearing a mask.
Wow. So this was a very historic anniversary then that I was not aware of. My witty response was going to be, this is day 35 of what the hell happened to that WrestleMania documentary.
Okay.
I think
we should have like a flipboard with just continue turning over dates every day.
Yeah, this quiet documentary that was supposed to come out days after WrestleMania, just out in the wild as we search for this thing. But we have lots to go through today, and you're welcome to chime in with your super chats, whether it be any of the many topics that are going on, or if you were there for Brandon Thurston's unmasked professional wrestling debut. Maybe you have some memories to share with Brandon. Who did you work 20 years ago? Do you remember off the top of your head?
I was in a 3-way tag team match, of course, against the Davidson brothers, Steve and Scott, and the All-Nighters, which was a team
Joey
from Southern
Knight.
Ontario. Okay, you know, Joey Knight and Robin Nightwing. I think it was.
That's right.
Or was it Kevin Grace on that occasion? I don't recall. I think it was Kevin Grace. I got the pin in that match too, by the way. First match, just got the pin.
Wow, look at you putting you over in the big debut. Yes, I was very familiar with the All-Nighters, veterans of Apocalypse Wrestling Federation.
Of course, yes, you would be very familiar.
Well, today we have lots to get into. We will probably be talking a bit about very big story that's going on in the state of Texas involving someone on this show. We'll get into kind of the weeds on that one. We also have a story that Brandon has just broken. We will talk about that a little later on, but we're going to start off with the latest in regards to the Janel Grant case, because over the past couple of days, we have got lots of filings, and Brandon, you have devoured a lot of these documents. We have got filings from Vince McMahon's legal representation. We also got WWE's response to the case. And we now have a firm alignment of the defendants that are very clearly all aiming for the same forum for this case to be tried, and that is in arbitration.
Yes, we got the first filing really from WWE, which was yesterday, last night, in fact. Because yesterday was the deadline for WWE to respond, and 4:00 went by, and usually that's when you get legal filings. They like to, put the ratings out in legal filings at the same time to mess with me. But we did get a filing for the first time from WWE's lawyers, from Paul Weiss, and we got a preview of it in a briefing schedule that was put out before, saying they expect to also move to compel, and they moved to compel to arbitration. And they did. So everybody, as John Laurinaitis has maybe was going to side with Grant, but then turns out not. So all three defendants, WWE is being sued in this case, as well as Vince McMahon and John Laurinaitis. They're all moving to arbitration, which means if the judge decides that this should go to arbitration, then that would be handled in private and would not be in the public court where everyone can see it. So that's what the judge eventually, I'm not sure how the timeline will play out. You never know in these legal issues, but that's what the judge will have to decide, whether this should go to arbitration or whether this should continue as a public lawsuit.
My scholarly analysis of the timeline, slow. That's how I predict this is going to go. Very slow. As we continue to debate where this arena will even where this will be occupied. But so let's go backward. And the attorneys for Vince McMahon, they filed a memorandum on Monday opposing Janel Grant's motion to strike previous statements by McMahon. So we go back a couple of weeks ago, Vince McMahon responded to the suit, and this was the outline trying to discredit Janel Grant. This was using the examples of when her parents had passed away, whether she was in fact a full-time caregiver, and then Ann Callis had a pretty swift response to that as well. And then the Janel Grant side, they wanted that stricken from the record. And essentially in this memorandum, Vince McMahon's team is stating that they were privy to, or the public was privy to, the 67-page lawsuit. They have a right to defend themselves, and this is, and they're calling it meritless and the height of hypocrisy for Janel Grant's side to want this stricken from the record when it is Vince McMahon defending himself and trying to discredit Janel.
Right. So this is sort of responses on top of responses here. But as you said, when Vince put out his preliminary statement, which was in addition to the legal argument, the sort of more boring legal argument about why this should go to arbitration, he also put out this preliminary statement citing legal cases and saying that, you know, her parents had actually died a couple of years before she even met Vince, and suggesting that she's exaggerating this notion that she was still grieving for her parents. So that happened. And then when that happened, Ann Callis who is Grant's lawyer, filed this motion to strike. So what they're saying is that, you know, this is relevant to the case. And, you know, you can't strike this because it is relevant. This is showing, you know, why you shouldn't believe Janel Grant's allegations, and this should not be stricken from the record. So that's their argument.
Yeah. Another issue they brought up was that Janel Grant was still living with her fiance, which Janel Grant's side came back, stated this individual, Brian Gonzalez, was no longer her fiance, but that the plaintiff was living in a luxury multi-million-dollar building with another man during her entire relationship with the defendant. It is relevant context to the validity and enforceability of the arbitration provision, which the defendant bears the initial burden of showing. There is no basis to strike either the entire preliminary statement or any sentence within it simply because the plaintiff doesn't want those facts known to the public. So that was essentially their argument, that these are all relevant facts. She can quibble about whether this person was her fiance or not. They don't feel it's enough of a significant mischaracterization to have it stricken from the record. And it all goes back to the agreement that was signed in January of 2022 that McMahon's side is vociferously arguing to the letter of the agreement that any dispute should be done in arbitration. And this is cut and dry. This should not be up for debate. And adding the fact that in terms of the text messages that we saw Vince McMahon's side of the conversations released in the January lawsuit, now we have Vince McMahon's side stating that while the defendant is no longer in possession of the text messages between the parties, as Vince McMahon had deleted them when he broke off the relationship, the discovery in this case will show that the plaintiff sent him sexually explicit images of herself and texted him and listed a bunch of accusations here in terms of what was contained in the text messaging, indicating the fact that this was very consensual and that Janel Grant's inferring that her texts were as damaging, if not more so, and would paint a more clear picture of this relationship if they were to be released. But Vince McMahon doesn't have these texts, so we're going off of Vince McMahon's memory and what he has relayed to his legal team, and they are implying that Janel Grant still has the full conversations of these text messages, which you could make that assumption based on the fact they were released in the lawsuit. But does she have these text messages? Has she deleted any text messages? That would be a question for the plaintiff side.
Well, and they're talking about this being released in discovery. Maybe the mobile carriers would have this if they subpoenaed. I don't know. It sounds like maybe you can subpoena, say, Verizon or something like that, or AT&T or whoever their carriers are, and maybe they would have records of these that could be obtained in discovery. But you know what they're pointing out here is that so McMahon's side is saying, hey, there are other sides to these text messages that she didn't show. And I guess that's supposed to support the notion that this was a more consensual relationship than Grant is saying it is. She, McMahon's side is pointing out that she fantasized about being held down, about being in pain, about wanting rough sex and things like that. Contrast that with Grant's allegations are that she was raped, that she was sexually assaulted by both McMahon and Laurinaitis in WWE headquarters in one scene, and that this was a very controlling relationship. Can both of those things exist at the same time? Can you have a very aggressive style sexual relationship, but then also be assaulted? I mean, logically, yes, both of those things can exist at the same time.
Yes, I think that is, like how would you look at this in terms of McMahon's defense at this point? Because now we have several instances of their attempt to level the playing field when it comes to public perception, going back to the New York Post release of the quote unquote love letter. We saw a pretty, I won't say glowing piece, but on Vince McMahon, but in terms of him, rescuing dogs and such. I mean, we've seen all these different examples. And then of course his statement coming back here, I get the sense, I don't know if you are going to be able to tip the public's opinion towards Vince McMahon, but that is the objective. Do you feel that they are at all succeeding in that front of getting Vince McMahon's side across, and that there is any kind of rethinking when it comes to people's view of Vince McMahon? Or is it just these allegations are so heinous and we have not seen any kind of smoking gun at this point to exonerate Vince McMahon?
I haven't sensed that. We still have, I mean, the Grant complaint was really a turning point, right? He resigned and there were these graphic descriptions of assault and a controlling non-consensual relationship. That's her side of the story. And W has distanced themselves, apparently, from Vince McMahon. We saw that. That was one of the big takeaways. Not only was the story finished by Cody Rhodes, but one of the big takeaways was that this was a new era. And that seems to be code for this is the Vince McMahon free era. And that's sort of the impression I think that the wrestling fans at least have. Add that into, there are 7 different women with allegations of sexual misconduct against Vince. 4 of them had NDAs that had to be disclosed and that WWE had to make financial changes to their financial reports because of. And then there's also the Rita Chatterton allegation of rape that also has NDAs associated with it. There's 2 women at separate spas that allege sexual misconduct by Vince McMahon. So there's an apparent track record of this sort of behavior from McMahon that I think is going to be difficult to make the public forget about, or to make them believe that it's that these allegations aren't true.
And we are largely talking at this point about the wrestling audience that I would state that is following this and keeping up on the latest filings and such, because we've seen such a drop off even from some mainstream outlets that were covering this, that largely it feels that unless this were to go to trial, I don't know how much re-engagement you're going to see from a higher profile level of some of the outlets that had been looking at this story, that it seems as though this is pretty in the weeds for a lot of people to be following the minutia of all of these statements and such. And I think anything short of a trial, I don't know how much attention it's going to get beyond whatever the conclusion of this is.
And if this goes to arbitration, it gets pretty quiet at that point, unless there's some way that those parties could make the details of arbitration public, which is not clear to me.
So just continuing on, this again is still from Vince McMahon and his legal team. They're filing on Monday, was the fact that we also got on, let's go fast forward to Tuesday, where McMahon filed a statement of undisputed material facts supporting his motion to compel arbitration, and just reiterating the negotiated terms. Of course, it was Jerry McDivitt negotiating on behalf of Vince McMahon from K&L Gates, and Jonathan M. Shapiro, who was the former lawyer for Janel Grant from the Ayton Law Partners LLP. And it stated in this statement that Grant was initially offered $1 million, and she was able to negotiate up to $3 million for the NDA, with $1 million paid within 10 days of the execution of the agreement in January 2022. And then every February 1st for the next 4 years, she would receive installments of $500,000. The first installment period in 2023, McMahon did not pay because this came months after the Wall Street Journal reports and felt that the NDA had been violated. And that's how we get to this present arrangement between them. And a lot of this is just going over like the language in the NDA, which is just outlining any dispute arising under or out of this agreement, its construction, interpretation, application, performance, or breach. The parties agree to first attempt to resolve such disputes informally and prior to taking any formal legal action to resolve such disputes. And in the event that any such dispute cannot be resolved informally, all parties hereto agree that the sole and exclusive legal method to resolve any and all disputes and or controversies is to commence binding arbitration under the Federal Arbitration Act, pursuant to the procedures of the American Arbitration Association, which we'll just call AAA from now on.
Yeah.
Not
one of our favorite acts among federal legislation. So I guess one way to think about this is that there's this NDA agreement. And I think when we say, well, that's kind of like ATM machine, right? That there's this NDA. And when we say there's this NDA, we're thinking like that they only agreed to non-disclosure and it was like in exchange for money. But I guess what a contract is it's this series of clauses and agreements. It's sort of this bundle of agreements. One of the things that they agreed to, which was very important in this case, was that they agreed to not disclose anything about their relationship, right? And they agreed that Vince would pay her money over time. But what the defendants are especially pointing out here, right? What's also a part of this agreement is that there was an arbitration clause so that any dispute, any disagreement that we have over this agreement should go to arbitration. And that's what the defendants are all emphasizing at this point. What Grant's side is arguing is that, well, because for various reasons, because she reported that, or because she was coerced into this agreement, she says, because of the Speak Out Act and other reasons, this agreement shouldn't be enforceable. And it's also important to remember that the Speak Out Act is a new piece of legislation, and the language seems pretty unclear to me. There's language about pre-dispute and before the dispute. So it seems like classically the Speak Out Act is supposed to be about when you come into a job and they make you sign an NDA right away, and then you're the victim of misconduct, that NDA should not be valid. This is a case of an NDA being made after alleged misconduct happened. Although importantly, I think that we'll see what happens as far as Grant's future filings here. I think it's very important to point out that she raises that she was assaulted again by McMahon after the NDA was signed. So that could become an important issue, which she has not raised, and nobody's talked to us about that. But I sort of feel like that's an important issue. We'll see if that comes up. And I think there's another thing that maybe people aren't clear about is that it seems pretty clear to me that Grant disclosing to the friend who supposedly writes the anonymous email to the board, that's how the NDA is initially broken. That's how the agreement is initially broken, right? He misses the first payment almost 1 year after that point. And that's why he stops paying. Apparently he feels like she broke the NDA by disclosing it to the friend, and there's an anonymous email. The board finds out. So he's not going to pay this anymore. It wasn't a matter of Vince just deciding to stop paying.
It's also brought up the exact date that they reach out to Janel Grant's legal counsel. It's March 30th of 2022. So it might be even to the day that the board gets this anonymous email, and they're immediately going to Janel Grant, believing that she has now broken this confidentiality.
And I guess we should entertain, like, is there any way somebody could have known about that relationship without knowing about it from Janel Grant? I don't know if that's something that they would try to argue. The person we've never seen the email itself, but the person, according to the Wall Street Journal reports, asserts to be a friend of Grant. So, I mean, how else would that person have known about it?
Yeah, it's a relevant question. If there was any room there for other people to have knowledge of what's alleged to have occurred here. So that is kind of the Vince McMahon side. And then what we were waiting for was WWE filing its motion, which happened on Tuesday night, just hours after this latest filing from Vince McMahon. And WWE is disputing Janel Grant's allegations, but as a threshold matter, this dispute cannot be heard in court because Grant agreed to arbitrate her claims. WWE therefore moves to compel this action to arbitration. Simply put, Grant has no claims actionable in this court because the separation and non-disclosure agreement she signed with McMahon and WWE, the monetary benefits of which she concededly accepted and retained, contains an arbitration provision that unambiguously precludes this court from adjudicating her claims. In particular, Grant agreed that the sole and exclusive legal method to resolve any and all disputes and or controversies is to commence binding arbitration under the Federal Arbitration Act. The language is clear and unconditional. Not only are Grant's allegations squarely within the scope of the arbitration provision, but the agreement also expressly commits to arbitration the issue of arbitrability itself. Add that one to your Google search. Accordingly, this court should enforce the parties' agreed upon method of addressing Grant's claims and compel this action to arbitration. So in a nutshell, they are in lockstep now with Vince McMahon and John Laurinaitis pushing for this to go to arbitration. And you would have to do a bit of assuming here that WWE is, I feel, publicly wants to distance itself from Vince McMahon, but as a matter here, I think it benefits them greatly that this is not some public trial, that their letters are going to be splashed over all of the headlines in connection to this. And if Vince McMahon is successful in discrediting Janel Grant and making this go away, well, WWE is also that further removed from this case.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. What do you think about this? They use this word concededly twice, or at least some form of it, the monetary benefits of which she concededly accepted and retained. Basically, what they're saying there, it's not clear, is that she took the first $1 million payment, and is WWE calling her conceded? Is it kind of they are denying the allegations, but they haven't really attacked her, and this is the closest to some sort of verbal attack by WWE. I think it's slight, but it is saying that, like, well, why would you take the money and keep the money if if you had all these issues with the NDA?
You could read it that way. You could certainly infer the fact that,
or is it conceded in the sense that, like, she's giving into the agreement and cooperating with the agreement by keeping the money?
Well, I would, again, we're trying to get into their head here, the meaning behind it, but you could certainly interpret it as if this was such a significant issue, that was the time to raise it. And I mean, it's a greater discussion about just the pressure that she would have been under in this particular situation. But I think that is going to be the strategy here of looking at, you accepted this money and you violated the agreement. You entered this agreement willingly, and that's probably going to be argued too by Janel Grant's side of how willingly she was to enter this agreement in the case of who she was up against and what was presented to her.
Yeah. And I guess as far as a legal argument, I'm getting the sense that it's going to be difficult for Grant's side to avoid arbitration, at least partially here. And partially is an important thing that's raised too. That's sort of a new subtle layer to this legal argument that WWE in this case is raising, that, hey, look, even if some of these things shouldn't go to arbitration, the judge should still allow the arbitrator to decide that. And if some of this should be handled in public court, maybe, but that's not for the court to decide. That's for the arbitrator to decide. And then the question for Grant's side, I think, is, do any of these arguments that they've raised about why this NDA should not be enforceable, do any of those disqualify the arbitration clause? The Speak Out Act pertains to NDAs. The Speak Out Act doesn't say anything about arbitration. So we'll see if any of that how any of that is argued by Grant's side when they do put in a reply.
The Grant side since these filings has been relatively quiet. We did get a comment from Ann Callis that simply said, for any comment, see our original filing. We're confident the truth is laid out well there. So it does seem as though Grant's side is not looking to engage in any public back and forth here, but it was essentially the Vince McMahon and WWE sides getting out their latest statements this past week. And again, going back several weeks to where John Laurinaitis essentially flipped and aligned with Vince McMahon as well. So that's where we stand now. And it remains sort of on this timeline of where we go forward and the ultimate ruling of if this will be done in arbitration. And larger questions that hang over this are, what is Vince McMahon's goal here? Is it simply to hold her to this non-disparagement agreement or non-disclosure agreement and have this done in arbitration? Because his reputation has been absolutely tarnished in what this lawsuit has outlined regarding him. And you would have to think that Vince McMahon is looking to repair his image to get back into whatever it is he wants to do with his remaining working years. We've questioned, is arbitration really the best forum for that? And what are the restrictions about a ruling in arbitration where, in theory, both sides would be kind of held to a agreement that they would not be able to disclose the findings? Is that going to be enough for people to have a confidence in working with Vince McMahon?
Working with him in what? Does he have future business plans? He's got lots of money for sure. He has liquidated more than $1 billion in TKO stock. He's still, as far as we know, holding 8 million shares. So plenty of money at his disposal, unless he's already spent it to do whatever he wants. Retire to the yacht.
So we will continue to follow the ever expanding court docket when it comes to the Janel Grant case.
And just add one more thing. I was discussing this with Todd Martin in terms of the language around the Speak Out Act, and with it being such a new piece of legislation that was only put into effect in December 2022, and with the sort of vague language, as I talked about on the Sunday podcast for subscribers, it does seem like that there may have been some back and forth in terms of how that act was, how its language was written. Because they, in a previous version of the Speak Out Act, there was a specific definition about what a pre-dispute NDA was, where it clearly defined a pre-dispute NDA as any NDA that any NDA after which a lawsuit occurred. So basically, it would totally apply to Grant's NDA. There's a lawsuit that happened. And then well before that, there was an NDA. But then it was changed and the language was made more ambiguous. That definition was taken out of it. I mean, like, long story short, I doubt this case is going to go away absolutely for a long time. And there could be appeals. And I don't think it's even unreasonable to imagine that this issue might eventually be taken to the Supreme Court. But, who knows?
And we feel like broken records, but let's also remember the fact that a federal indictment is not out of the question. And then this becomes a whole different ballgame in terms of what this could grow into, and takes this from a civil matter into a criminal one. We know of the existence of a federal investigation, but if an indictment is to follow, then suddenly there will be a lot of renewed focus on this story from a lot larger of a media spotlight.
Yeah, and whatever news follows out of that, I mean, who knows the details that might be uncovered through a criminal investigation, as far as we know, is still ongoing, related to the Southern District of New York, which is sort of the federal district that has probably a lot of resources and has the ability to thoroughly investigate a big story like this would be.
Let's move on to the state of Texas. And
okay.
What is the state of Texas, Brandon? This is a story that you have been covering because you've been in the eye of the storm here. But if we can at least go here, I'll kind of go over some of the Cole's notes here, and Brandon, you can fill in the gaps here. But WWE, they filed a complaint earlier this year in February to Attorney General Ken Paxton. So remember that name, Ken Paxton. He's on Brandon's Rolodex. Over the disclosure of records related to the Royal Rumble 2023 at the Alamo Dome by the city of San Antonio. And of course, the Alamo Dome, a public venue, which is owned and operated by the city, which is music to Brandon's ears when he is seeking out information. And WWE is trying to state that there are trade secrets that contain proprietary information and fit into an exemption in Texas's public information law, which would prevent them from handing this information over to one Brandon Thurston of WrestleNomics. And WWE, they initially were provided this exemption last April, but then out of nowhere, like manna from the sky, this was reversed in January by the Attorney General. And this came after a second records request because Brandon had the backing of Intelligence Options LLC, who also wanted to see this data. Now, we still don't know what Intelligence Options LLC, who they were representing, but it had something to do.
I have nothing to do with Intelligence Options LLC, just to be clear.
Yes, let's not get our wording mixed up here. Separate entities.
Yes.
But anyway, Intelligence
they look
Options.
to be. Oh, go ahead. You're about to say.
Yeah, I mean, they were connected to a lawsuit and they deal with litigation consulting. So presumably some suit against WWE they were involved with, but then the suit has been settled. Again, we don't know what suit they were working with, but they took themselves out of this request, leaving Brandon with the decision, shall I stay or shall I go? And Brandon said, give me those records. And thus we have moved forward here. So there has been a sworn declaration from WWE's side stating that if this were made available to Brandon to publicize their financial information, WWE would lose their bargaining power in negotiating all of our live events and much of the value of a bidding process for venues. So all these site fees that you hear TKO just patting themselves on the back for and are just rolling in cash, Brandon could end it like that, okay, if he reported this. Zero site fees, okay? That's what's at stake here from the WWE side of things. The Texas Attorney General's office, apparently, they have better things to do because as of today, have they responded, Brandon? Have they done anything to respond to this complaint by WWE?
Let me check the docket. As of yesterday when I looked, they have not. I'm loading the docket right now. Let's watch the docket load. We might as well. Let's put it right on the screen for everybody. Here it is. No action. No action so far.
So everybody, I want everyone to go and find Ken Paxton on Twitter. And I want everyone to ask Ken Paxton if he is going to respond to this because he was served March the 1st and WWE is moving for a default judgment. Okay. This is like a last man standing match. And Ken Paxton, we're at the count of 9. Okay. So is he going to make the heroic stand up here? We're not too optimistic about it. So there will be a hearing on May 29th at 9 a.m. involving WWE's attorney that they have hired, Trisha DeLeon, and Judge Jan Soifer about this default judgment. So that's an important date, May 29th, where I would assume if Ken Paxton is not so much as even responding to this, it gives a lot of leverage for the WWE side to argue, listen, this guy can't even be bothered to respond to this. We should get the default judgment, and they could very easily just go along with this because there is basically no backing here by Ken Paxton. So that is the Royal Rumble side of things. But you know what? The state of Texas, WWE loves running the state of Texas. And you may recall that two WrestleManias have taken place in Arlington at AT&T Stadium since 2016 with versions number 32 and 38. So Brandon Thurston deciding, you know what, Ken Paxton, you are not helping my case. So I'm going to go to your boss. And Brandon went to the governor's office, Greg Abbott, and he made a request for records related to those two WrestleMania events. And
actually,
WWE,
just for WrestleMania 38, just for the 2022 WrestleMania.
That's right, because WrestleMania
we already have David Bixenspan already has the records for 32.
Correct. So now WWE, it seems like they almost have a game plan in place. Okay, like Brandon's face is up on a wall, and it's like, in case of this, do this. And these are the policies they now have in place. Okay, you know what WWE legal they were looking up? Something called the deliberative process privilege. Can you tell us a bit about what the deliberative process privilege is, Brandon?
Yeah, and just to be clear, so I've requested WrestleMania 2022 And I went to the governor and said, please give me the.
Sorry, WrestleMania 32?
WrestleMania 38 in the year of 2022.
Okay, you said WrestleMania 22. Gotcha. 2022.
So for that event and the Royal Rumble San Antonio 2023 event. So basically, I've made a second request pertaining to the Royal Rumble, which they're trying to withhold, which I did mention in my request. Hey, look, I know there's a lawsuit about this. What is process privilege? What is it called?
Deliberative process privilege.
I gather it means this contains communications between agencies, and in a what does it say in there? And in a lawsuit, this would not be able to obtain it. They say that it would chill the ability to make certain governmental opinions and advice. So they're referring to in this letter where they're asking the Attorney General, the governor's office is asking the Attorney General to give us the exemption. And they're saying that because of deliberative process privilege, which is in this Exhibit B, which they didn't share with me, which I understand is part of the law. They're saying because of that exemption, this fits that exemption. We can't release this. I would suggest, well, even if it does, redact it and give me what's left of it. But that's what they're claiming. That's related to WrestleMania 2022, WrestleMania 38 in Dallas in 2022. And do you know about what's happening with the request for Royal Rumble?
Yes. So that is their game plan for WrestleMania 2022, deliberative process privilege. Royal Rumble 2023, they've said, wait a minute, we can have a multiple choice on this box. So we have ticked off deliberative process privilege, but you know what? Let's throw something else against the wall and see if that sticks, because also we are going to claim an exemption under common law privacy. So again, Brandon Thurston is looking for records in the nature of paid attendance. What was the amount that WWE was paid to bring such an event to Texas? These are the kinds of things he is asking about. And common law privacy, this is how it is explained in this letter. The office of the governor asserts that the information marked in this Exhibit B, that again, Brandon has not seen, consists of information that is, quote, intimate and embarrassing and not of legitimate concern to the public. I would say anything intimate and embarrassing, I am very interested as a consumer in. But I go on, including financial decisions that do not relate to transactions between an individual and a governmental body. Therefore, the office of the governor asserts the marked information is confidential under common law privacy and must be withheld under section 552.101 of the government code.
Yeah. Again, there's Exhibit B, which is attached and shown to the Attorney General. It'll be an assistant Attorney General who makes the decision here. I don't see it, but they're saying that there's something in here. And by the way, so what I've asked for specifically is a very specific document called the disbursement request related to this event. David Bixenspan's request obtained that for WrestleMania 32 in 2016. And it's a very exciting document with all sorts of invoices, receipts. There's a table summarizing all the expenses that the local government ended up reimbursing the cost of, which was W got to use AT&T Stadium for free because the government paid for it, like $1 million. They got to use American Airlines Arena for free. So my inquiry is that, well, maybe the government paid for those costs related to WrestleMania 2022. They got approved for $9 million, so it's probably what they used it for. Maybe something similar happened in the case of Royal Rumble in San Antonio. Maybe the government, reimbursed the cost of using the Alamo Dome and using, other costs. So that's what I'm trying to find out here. Again, I expect it to be a long list of receipts and invoices. What would be embarrassing and highly intimate about that is beyond me. And it's one thing to, it is relatively trivial to request records and get records pertaining to attendance and gates, ticket sales and things like that. But what I think is really in the public interest here is learning, what did citizens' tax dollars pay for? And shouldn't they be allowed to assess whether those dollars are being spent wisely? Not that I doubt that WWE events benefit local economies, but shouldn't taxpayers, citizens, that is governments, be allowed to get transparent pricing when it comes to site fees. So the more opacity there is about this, the more mystery there is about what a Royal Rumble or a WrestleMania is worth. And by the way, we know what this year's WrestleMania is worth. It seems like a lot of this information is public as it is. In any case, shouldn't citizens...
and not through people like having to necessarily battle through red tape. A lot of times we're getting these figures from TKO itself. Like, they are boosting the fact that these figures are like site fees.
I don't think WWE is giving or TKO is giving the exact numbers. They're bragging about how much they're worth, right? Are they giving exact numbers that you can think of?
For Perth, we knew that the figure was around $20 million for a grouping of shows.
I believe it said 16, but they sort of obscured how many events this really pertains to, right?
Right. But they've attached dollar figures to it. But yeah, Perth is the one that comes to mind immediately.
Yeah. The government in Puerto Rico did tell me $1.5 million cash for Backlash and an additional $300,000 value for the venue. I'm guessing WWE was not happy when I reported that. But the government told me directly, right? And we know that because of a press release where Cardiff is bragging about what a benefit this was, they got some 10 times increase on their investment. It seems to imply that Cardiff, the Cardiff event, was worth, I believe, $2.8 million when you convert the currency. We know that the Las Vegas WrestleMania, sorry if I'm jumping ahead, will be $5 million that has been granted by the local Las Vegas organization. So we know a lot about what the site fees are. Saudi Arabia is $50 million. We've known that for a long time. The actual cash site fee that WWE got for WrestleMania in 2016 and WrestleMania in 2022 was $350,000, but they got millions of dollars worth of in-kind values. They got things that they would have had to have paid for themselves, paid for by the government, or actually by this intermediary, which is this local organizing committee that gets approval for the funding, spends the money for WWE, and then gets paid back by the government later. In short, the government is ultimately paying for these events, and governments in Texas, in San Antonio, around the world, who may be bidding for site fees in the future, they would perhaps, most likely, be able to bargain for a better price if they know as much as possible about what the other site fees are and what those agreements are like. But if there's mystery about that, WWE might be able to leverage a better price, a higher price for themselves, so that WWE can be more profitable.
This is just having like-to-like comparisons. Like, think about it in the free agency model of knowing what a second string quarterback is going to be getting on the open market versus, what is the rate for a second string quarterback on another team with comparables. Like, that is what they are trying to obfuscate here.
Or another wrestler in WWE or AEW. If you don't know what anybody else is making, it's harder to negotiate fairly and favorably for yourself.
Amazing how all these years, how Dana White says no fighter should ever state how much they make, because then all those hanger-ons, they're going to be coming after you. I'm not even looking at WWE necessarily as the bad guy in this entire thing. They are doing this to protect their, if they want to call them trade secrets, they want less information out there for their internal reasons. I look at the government here in Texas as the ones here that they are the ones that should be representing the taxpayers. Like, they are the ones that should be the ones. This should not be you having to make this argument. It should be them operating on the side of the taxpayers and stating, hey, we are going to be as transparent as possible, barring a outstanding reason that would prohibit us from allowing this. And I have not seen any argument here that this would be any kind of outstanding exemption to disclose reimbursement figures and site fees for an event that taxpayers are paying for and seeing their taxpayer dollars in action to bring these events to a state, and how much they are paying in relation to what other states are potentially bidding on for these same events. So I look at the Texas government here as the ones that are letting down their people, especially when this was filed March 1st, and here we are on March 15th, less than 2 weeks away from this hearing, and Ken Paxton has done nothing to even respond to this.
And you would think the state of Texas, the state level government, would be very incentivized to enhance, to create as much transparency around this as possible. We've got, two cases here where, there's been, a bidding one by the Dallas Arlington area, and here's San Antonio. And those are not the only major markets in Texas. There's Houston, and then there's Austin, at least. So it's not like you won't expect sometime in the next few years for there to be additional bids if there haven't even been recently for some of these major W events. You think they would all be incentivized to try to get the best price for how much government money is going to be spent here. I have emailed the Attorney General of Texas asking them, what's going on with this. I believe I sent an email yesterday and I have not heard back.
So if everyone wants to go on X to Ken Paxton TX, his last tweet is just the words "totally unacceptable." So if you want to voice your concern to Attorney General Ken Paxton, you're welcome to do so.
I've made phone calls too. I think I left a message and still haven't heard back.
You can also text Ken to 82762 as well. So maybe you can get on his mailing list. Maybe that's where WWE should have sent this notice to, and we would have gotten a response more prompt. But I think this is a very important story to be following. It's like, I'm curious if Texas is at all paying for this Jake Paul Mike Tyson fight that's happening at AT&T Stadium in July, which is expected to be a pretty sizable event for Netflix as it presents this big boxing fight. And
you could try to find out
who's above Greg Abbott. I don't know if we can go much further.
Well, you can try. You can send a records request. They all kind of use the same portal system too. It's very convenient.
Okay, well, we will look for that. It's apparently this response. It's in the same missing in action as this WrestleMania documentary. So it's probably all going to get released all in the same time. But great work on your part, Brandon. Before we go into kind of our media discussion that came out of last week's show, let's spend some time on a story that you just put out right before we went on to the air today. And this is an update on the Oklahoma State Athletic Commission. If you remember, about a month or two ago, we got the story that AEW received a warning when Nyla Rose had done a match late last year on an ROH show with Alejandra Lyon and was informed they were getting a warning about a transgender wrestler taking part in a match that is not allowed per the State Athletic Commission in Oklahoma.
Yes. So guess what I did? I sent a records request. And
were they aware of the extraordinary exemptions that they had at their disposal in Oklahoma City, or were they a bit more transparent?
I don't know. Every state has different laws. These are laws at the state level. So I have not looked deeply into what exemptions they could have tried to get approval for. But I did get a records request back, and I got some emails, mainly some emails, and that's what I was requesting. They also gave me a letter showing me that they had warned another promoter in 2023 about what it seems pretty clearly, it's not spelled out specifically, but seemed pretty clearly to have they had an intergender or had a transgender person wrestle on their show, and they were warned about it. And it looks like they had to do basically what AEW had to do, which was, we're warning you about this, but you can't do it again. Basically, you can't have a transgender wrestler wrestle someone who is a cisgender person who is of the same gender. So when Nyla Rose wrestled at the Oklahoma City show in December, at least two people emailed the commission, which we have records of. They emailed the commission asking, basically saying, what's with the inconsistency here? You're penalizing, this person and that person or in that promotion. So why are you not treating AEW the same way? Is it because AEW is a big promotion and they get preferential treatment? That's sort of their position. And they sent in, they had a hearing. Well, they had their meeting on January 3rd. Remember, this show was December 20th, I believe. The next day they were getting emails. Then they had a meeting on January 3rd with all of their members of the board who, one person they have a few people who are full-time employees, it looks like, but then they have sort of these board members, sort of like a board of a company. And they came together and they decided that, yes, they should warn AEW. So they sent an email to one Chris Harrington. You may have heard of him. Basically telling him that, look, we've investigated this, we looked into it, and we've decided that you have violated the rules here. You can reply to this email and just accept the warning, and you won't have to face any more penalties, or you can have a hearing. The records show that Chris Harrington copied his legal team and said, we'll get back to you. And then a few days later, a member of their legal team emailed the commission back saying, okay, we accept the correction. Keep in mind, AEW already had another event in Oklahoma scheduled at the time in Tulsa in February. So let's say, if they were going to fight it more, that might have put that event in jeopardy, I suppose. They did have the event in Tulsa. Nyla Rose at this time is appearing on a lot of Ring of Honor events. She did appear in Ring of Honor events on surrounding days of the Tulsa event. There were actually, as far as I can tell by looking at Cage Match, there were no Ring of Honor matches taped in Tulsa. So whether if this didn't happen, she would have been on that show. It's hard to say, but she was not on that show in Tulsa. I didn't realize until looking into this. Well, look, they've already been back to Oklahoma after this, but she was not on that show. There were no Ring of Honor matches on that show, so I don't know if she would have been on it anyway. In any case, that's happened. And I also spoke with a few people who are involved in wrestling in the local wrestling scene in Oklahoma, including Logan Knight, who's an independent wrestler who's been pushing back on a lot of commission issues. And I also spoke with a person who, Connor Vaughn, who has in 2022 applied for a wrestler's license. Connor Vaughn is a transgender man, and when he did his blood work and all of his paperwork was submitted to the commission approached Connor Vaughn and told him that, hey, look, we understand you're a transgender man here, and you can't wrestle other basically cisgender men, because we will be viewing that to be under our rules an intergender match, and that's not allowed. So my main takeaway here, though, is in this email that the commission administrator sent to AEW when they let them know that they were in violation of the rules. They mentioned that there is a meeting coming up in July, which is on their website. There's a meeting coming up on July 10th when the board members are all going to get together, and the administrator, who has since retired, that was Joe Miller. The administrator is now Diana Fletcher. But he mentioned that there's going to be a meeting and we might change the rule. It might not go into effect until July, but we're considering changing the rule. So, according to their rules, you can send a letter and request that this rule be changed. So on July 10th, maybe it will be changed, and that would allow transgender wrestlers to wrestle people of the same gender.
And AEW does not have any shows on the schedule set for the state of Oklahoma for the foreseeable future. So, right.
and that was something that was brought up in a media call in April. Tony Khan was asked about the situation, and he expressed a lot of support for Nyla Rose, and he expressed his disappointment in the Oklahoma State Athletic Commission. But then he was asked in a follow-up if AEW would be going back to Oklahoma, and he didn't really seem to be ready to answer it. And he said he would have to think about it, that he does want to support the fans and whatnot in Oklahoma, but he was not clear on whether or not they would go back. So we'll see if this rule gets changed in the first place. And I would suggest that maybe AEW could do something about this, and they could write a letter. I don't know if they have. I have asked them. I have not gotten a response. But we'll see if that happens, and if that rule does get changed, and if AEW does schedule any future shows in the state.
This feels like just a very outdated, rule on their books that could very easily be, I think, explained in a relatively simple fashion by AEW, by WWE. And I think that it would all come down to, I think, the open-mindedness of the commission members, that this is a pretty arcane rule on the books when we're talking about choreographed professional wrestling that we are talking about. We are not talking about boxing or mixed martial arts. We are talking about professional wrestling, where you are working in concert with another person.
And this is the rule that is in their rule book right now. It says the commission will not approve sanctioning permits between human participants and non-human participants. That means no wrestling bears, I guess, or between males and females. A male participant is defined as a person who has a heterogametic sex born with XY chromosomes. A female participant is a person born of homogametic sex chromosomes, XX chromosomes. So that's how they're defining that, which would also prevent intergender matches from happening. And I should mention too, we did get a comment from the commission through an assistant attorney general who said Ms. Fletcher, Diana Fletcher, who is the administrator of the commission, Ms. Fletcher does not wish to comment at this time on the ongoing matters related to the December 2023 AEW event or the specific rules pertaining to intergender exhibitions or matches. Any actions taken to rules under the jurisdiction of the commission must be done consistently with timeline and actions prescribed by the Oklahoma Administrative Procedures Act and the Oklahoma Office of Administrative Rules Regulations on Rulemaking. An agenda for the July 10th, 2024 public meeting will be made available to the public consistent with the Oklahoma Open Meeting Act, which will prescribe the items of business to be discussed / considered by the commission during that meeting. So stay tuned to the Oklahoma State Athletic Commission official website, I guess.
Yeah, if any travelers out there, May 29th in Texas and then July 10th, just hop on over to Oklahoma and you can be front row for some of these hearings.
And I understand there was an issue recently in Oklahoma where there was a show held on a Native American Indian reservation, and this was not a sanctioned show, but it was on the Native American reservation, and the commission responded to that by suspending the wrestlers who were involved in that show. Those suspensions have since been lifted, but there's been more engagement with people in the wrestling scene and the commission.
Well, great reporting on this story and following up on this, because a lot of times we see these controversies that come up and there's a fervor about them and they quickly get forgotten. And the follow-up stories are the most important, because obviously this is going to be addressed in some way, we believe, on July the 10th, and we'll see if any significant change occurs here. And AEW's future in the state, I think it would be a really bad look for them if this stays on the books and they go back to Oklahoma and omit Nyla Rose. Like, I think that they would certainly take a public hit from doing such a show.
And this was not a public story, I believe, when they went to Tulsa. I don't think this broke until March or so.
Or I guess it was February show.
Yeah. And the media call where Tony Khan addresses it is in April. So yeah, it's I understand they probably didn't want to jeopardize their scheduled show. And what would you do if there's a Dynamite taping? But yeah, I do wonder if there's something that AEW could do to affirm, to push for a change to the rule if they want to.
All right, we're going to move on and talk a little bit about last week. We had Lucas Sharpio on the show, and this generated a lot of discussion coming out of it. And I thought with a week removed, we could kind of look at last week and try to kind of put this into context, the WWE and its media relations. There was, I think, a statement from Lucas on the show last week that everyone focused on, and rightly so, of not just the fact that it was his question that led to Paul Levesque's response and trying to discredit Fightful and PW Insider, but the fact that after that question, not only were there some groans among media members in the room, but the fact that a WWE PR rep informed Lucas what a dumb thing to do. And that caught both of us off guard. We were not aware of that experience that Lucas had prior to him disclosing it on the show last week.
I think I created a meme of myself reacting to him saying that.
Yeah. I'm just like so stoic. I look like I'm on life support, and Brandon like comes through the screen like, what? But yeah, I think we both had the same reaction, even if visually looking different. But yeah, it was extremely disappointing to hear that a WWE PR rep would have such a response to that and vocalizing it. And since that time, Joe Lanza over at Voices of Wrestling wrote a pretty comprehensive breakdown of this whole story and adding his own reporting, including noting that he was told off the record questions that were fed to other media members in the press conference as well. It just paints a story, and it's hard for us not to kind of connect this to a larger media strategy, whether intentional or not, of what we are seeing here specific to the WWE when it comes to instances of just trying to shut down I hazard to even call Lucas's question like this crazy hard-hitting question. It was just like, it was a very serious question. It was a very relevant question. But I mean, you could have gone much further, I would state, with a Paul Levesque up there among all the stories that are, percolating that you could ask about, and getting that kind of a response to your own experiences, Brandon, that you're going through right now of this kind of suppression of information. And I think it does bring about the need to not just take these as all isolated incidents and then we just move on. Because I think sometimes as a whole, members of the wrestling media, we tend to avoid talking about ourselves or our own different experiences here. But it is something that's important to be focusing upon, because this stuff is kind of going unchecked, and you just look at this isolated Backlash press conference and this stuff should not be going unchecked.
Yeah, I mean, we have reached out to WWE. They did not have a comment about that issue in particular, about Lucas raising that he was told by a member of WWE's PR team what a dumb thing to do about his question. This report from Flagship, Voices of Wrestling Flagship podcast, mentions that questions were fed to people in that press conference. I can say that's not the first time that I've heard about questions being fed at a W press conference, or an AEW press conference for that matter. I've been told in both promotions that there, at least on occasion, have been questions that have been fed to members of the media. And I suppose there's some projection you can have about, well, maybe they just suggested a question. I mean, we can, go round and round about that. But that doesn't surprise me on that occasion that they were suggesting, some questions to be asked. And then we had somebody from the Washington Post, Herb Scribner, who tweeted after he was quote tweeting somebody posting a video of Lucas, saying that what his experience was like at the press conference, and Herb Scribner from one of the biggest outlets in the country, Washington Post, saying that was consistent with his experience, and he felt that this is WrestleMania in particular now. WrestleMania, that there were people who were told that they were going to be in the press conference but were not. I think it's interesting to think about, there were hundreds of media credentialed at WrestleMania. I was in the press conference. You were not. I wonder if, mainstream reporters were expecting or hoping or wanted to get in the press conference and were not. As I said on Sunday, I looked around the room and I don't recall, like unusual faces or people who I thought were from mainstream outlets. You would think if they were ever going to, be at a press conference, it's the WrestleMania press conference that they were going to be at. And it seemed like sort of the same kind of group of people in terms of wrestling specific people who were in the room. So, and it led to what everybody saw in those press conferences on both nights. They were, pretty easy questions, I would say.
And my like, I wasn't taking attendance or anything, but it did seem as though the same media that got access night one were the ones that got in night two. It didn't seem as though it was, you get shut out one night, you get in the second night. That was kind of what I was hopeful of, but it did seem as though, like, you would probably know, being in the room, it was probably a lot of the same faces both nights.
Based on my memory, I would say that sounds right to me.
And name all the people that were there. Did you take attendance? No. Yeah. So certainly you can look at this, and I think that there is, like, obviously, I don't know if there will be a press conference attached to the Saudi Arabia show that is coming up.
There never has been one.
I would tend to think not.
There have been like these pre-events, but there have not been these post-PLE pressers in Saudi Arabia.
Probably one in Glasgow in June would be the next opportunity that we have a chance to have one of these press conferences. And I think that it's going to be on the various media of what they're looking for in these press conferences, and kind of holding WWE to, like, what do you expect of these press conferences? And it's kind of going to be these sorts of actions. If there isn't that pushback, it's only going to be continuing, or it's going to be implied that they don't even have to be necessarily telling you what question to ask, but the reaction you get from these press conferences is, I don't want to jeopardize anything, and I know the questions to ask. And I think that's sort of where you get, it's sort of, you hear an example of someone like a Lucas, and it permeates to people lower on the totem pole that are maybe at their first press conference and are going to be concerned about rocking the boat or not getting invited back. And I don't look at that as some sign of weakness. If you are a media member that is assigned by a company, and if you get thrown out of a press conference or told you are not being invited back, well, you are of less value to your outlet. And that's an unfortunate reality. But this is kind of where, scare tactics can have their effectiveness, is you don't even have to say it out loud. It just, we have this situation where it basically was said out loud at the Backlash press conference.
Yeah, I think there's a scene in George Orwell's 1984 that's like this, isn't there? I mean that's a benefit and perhaps a privilege that we have. Like, we're independent outlets. We don't have bosses. Nobody's gonna yell at us for, asking a question that prevents us from getting invited back at a presser.
I just answered a Wei Ting.
Yes. Well, everybody answers to Wei Ting. But yeah, I don't know. Do you think like the conversation that's been had in the last couple of weeks, partly because of, or maybe largely because of Lucas's experience and specifically how Triple H, maybe more importantly, reacted to his question, is that going to make people ask any more serious questions? I'm not getting too optimistic. I think I can speak to the format of both the AEW and the W pressers is that it's talent first, and naturally talent aren't C-suite executives. I'm not going to, ask them, about misconduct in the company. So we have all those easy questions. And I think that sort of sets a tone. And I don't know that this is by design, but this is the effect, is that it sort of sets the tone in this room of like asking softer questions, because there are people that are basically only going to get soft questions. And then
sorry to interrupt, but it's all winners as well. And I don't think that's nothing. It naturally, as someone is coming off probably a big performance, they've won a championship. Typically the first thing out of the questioner's mouth is congratulations. Like, it does paint this scene of this almost like pep rally, this celebratory like after party, to kind of go with the performers. And then you bleed into Paul Levesque, and it's like this sharp turn sometimes.
And then the C-suite executive gets there, and you've already experienced, especially in AEW press conference, you've experienced maybe an hour of this, and in WWE it's maybe a half an hour. But I think I can kind of feel it in the room. Maybe it's just my own mind, but I can kind of feel it in the room of like, oh my God, are you gonna change the tone of this entire room? That's that WWE or AEW has provided here, and I think I kind of noticed that, and I imagine other people noticed that too. And so again, as Lucas said, a lot of people blamed him for ruining the party of Backlash, as if that's what he did. I do understand how some people would feel that way, and they want to be invited back. And sometimes these things are just sort of a glorified fan Q&A.
No, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think there is a lot of that, and I always try to put myself into the shoes of other people that are maybe not in positions you and I have, that you and I have a lot more latitude. I would state, like, we are not beholden to making sure we get access to the next press conference, or, oh my goodness, we don't want to offend. Our models, not to get into the weeds, are not built on that. So I think I think there's further responsibility on people such as you and I and several others as well, that we have that latitude, that we have to be utilizing it for such. But it is, I think last week, the combination of the fact that I think if we had just taken Paul Levesque's answer, or we had just taken Lucas's story, I think in combination, it just painted a really kind of illuminating picture of, what other elements are at play here, beyond just these press conferences that have received their criticism in time, and are WWE fostering a relationship with its media to have open dialogue and to practice journalism at the most basic level. And to me, especially the comment from the PR representative, like, again, I said this last week, if this happened at an NBA press conference, name your sport, this would be a really big story. Like, look back at the basketball player recently who refused to speak to an ESPN reporter because she didn't subscribe to his podcast. And that blew up into this huge story. And a lot of it was the media rallying together. Like, this is insane that you are turning your back and refusing to speak to a reporter because she doesn't subscribe to your podcast. The idea that a representative from the league would be telling a reporter what a dumb thing to do. And the fact that this was as well like bullying to a degree of a young reporter that there's no way this rep is pulling that with this Washington Post representative or any seasoned media veteran at an outlet. Like, it, to me, showed a lack of respect for somebody that is getting their start in wrestling media, because you wouldn't be pulling that with a Brandon Thurston. You wouldn't be pulling that with many other outlets, because you just wouldn't do that.
You're saying Paul Levesque would not say the same thing to me?
I'm talking about the PR rep. Paul Levesque probably.
I see.
I don't know if he would be biting his tongue. He probably wouldn't be.
I don't think he differentiates between me and someone else.
But this PR rep, I think, would. I think that it very much had to do with who he was saying that to as well. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's my thought on it. And perhaps we get to a point where they don't put Paul Levesque in these press conferences. That would certainly, I think, alleviate. I don't think the wrestlers are getting the degree of questions that a Paul Levesque is. But what is this? This is also a vehicle for Paul Levesque. He is the leader of this company. He is our Dana White, and there is a reason he is always going to be put up there. Like, that is, that's the guy whose voice is over the signature, and he is the representative of this company as its leader. So there is that value to WWE presenting him in that light.
Yeah, and I would add, part of the reason why there aren't more serious questions asked is because I think a lot of the people in the room maybe just don't know what I think the good questions would be to ask. And part of that has to do with who's given access, who's selected to be in the room, and who is given the microphone to ask the question. And in fairness to WWE and AEW for that matter, I've never been at a press conference except for the second night of WrestleMania where I have not been given the microphone to ask one question. And I'm aware that, there's some discussion about, like, if I'm just like the token person who's given permission to ask one question, so we can feel like this is a more serious situation and it lends it credibility. I can't get into anyone's mind to know if that's what's happening there. But
here's a question, Brandon. If you were, let's say that the next event, you don't get access to the press conference, do you think that becomes a big story? Do you think that is something that what would be the harm for WWE to not give you access the next time?
It's a question of, like, how far does what we do and say matter? And I don't know a good answer to that question, because I mean, if I'm not let in a press conference, we will discuss that. That will reflect poorly on them. How far does that go? How far does that matter? It's hard for me to say.
Well, we love talking about ourselves, as you can tell, based on this. But I think this is something we will continue to keep and monitor more. And on both sides too. Like, this is not a WWE AEW issue. I think this is overall. You can apply it to
everything. Is a WAW issue.
Yes, of course. We don't have any TNA press conferences that we ever get to discuss. I would like some variety of companies doing these pressers. Let's do a few quick notes before we get out of here. Dana White held a pretty infamous press conference this past Saturday, keeping on the subject of press conferences. Brandon, I know you got to see some of the greatest hits out of this, including one individual caught Derek Lewis's cup and then asked for Dana White to sign it. And you can't make this stuff up. But at the press conference, he was asked this question, and let's hear from Dana White.
Are you at all in the future envisioning a scenario where you guys do the UFC and Power Slap in the same weekend in the same city?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to happen. We already have those dates set up right now. Yeah, where Power Slap goes Friday and UFC goes Saturday.
And last one for me.
And then you're going to see Friday Power Slap, Saturday UFC, and Sunday WWE. I mean, you'll start seeing that stuff too.
Could you think of a better weekend, Brandon?
Power Slap, maybe. I mean, Las Vegas is going to be where WrestleMania is. Maybe we can get some Power Slap in there somewhere. Maybe Friday morning might be free. I'll say I think it's interesting. We know that SmackDown is going to be on Friday, and at least in those first weeks on USA Network. And maybe it's a site fee thing that plays into that, in terms of it's easier to sell a bundle of events, including a SmackDown on Friday. So maybe it'll stay in that night.
That was my thinking of that press release we saw from NBC Universal last week, is that keeping it to Friday and SmackDown, as we continue to see being paired with international premium live events on the Saturday, but expanding that if there are going to be these UFC and WWE weekends, and how much you can bring to a city to enhance its value. Like we realistically could have a Friday where there's a SmackDown and you book Power Slap is not running in a major NBA size arena. You just have to find a small 1,000 or 2,000 seater for, and then you have a big Saturday pay-per-view with UFC and Sunday WWE. These are some interesting insights. Also, Dana was asked about the UFC Apex, the home of NXT Battleground. And we're going to see, this is basically the sliding doors example of the state of the UFC Apex. We're going to hear first from Dana White.
Do you think there'll be a time where the Apex shows are like maybe once a month, if that, or you'll use it more sparingly, or are you happy to have that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying this for a long time, but we got to get out of the Apex and start doing more events in all these different cities, and we're starting to do it. We're getting it done this year.
Bringing events on the road is as much about growing our fan base as it is generating income, but it's also about ensuring that we maintain certain margins and profitability profile. And there's a cost-benefit analysis for us that we view opportunity costs of doing events domestically, internationally, and holding them at Apex. And those Apex events do carry the lowest cost structure for us to hold them in our home turf in Las Vegas.
The lowest cost structure option is the UFC Apex in Las Vegas. So that's Dana White juxtaposed with Andrew Schleimer, who I feel like in the UFC corporate offices, Dana White might put Andrew Schleimer in a locker. But that's those are your competing views of the UFC Apex shows. Yeah, we want to get on the road, and they did a $2.5 million gate for a random fight night this past weekend in St. Louis at the Enterprise Center. Highest gate for a fight night ever.
Plus a site fee.
And plus a site fee, of course. Good luck getting that. And yeah, the other side is, hey, we get this guaranteed revenue from ESPN to host a fight night. And if we can do it in the Apex that we own, great margins, as they would state. So that seems to be...
This is the lesson of COVID, was that I remember, the reason why I was smarter than the analysts one W earnings call was because I realized that they were going to save a lot of money by not being on the road and by producing everything out of the PC. And this is the reason why AEW, according to them, was almost profitable or something in that neighborhood. They were maybe the closest they've been to being profitable in 2020 because they didn't have to tour and they just ran everything out of a fixed location at Daly's place. So being in a fixed location that you own, that you don't have to expend hundreds of thousands of dollars in production expense every time you run a show there, is a huge cost savings.
Also, breaking news, everyone is losing their mind over where is the NBA going to end up in this next television negotiation cycle. What is WBD's future with the NBA? Here to end all the drama is Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons podcast.
By the way, one of the funniest things ever is that we're all pretending that the TV deal wasn't done like a week and a half ago.
I listen to you and Ethan. I'm just not as on it as you guys are.
No, I mean, me and Bellany were on it. Like, I think it's done. I think Warner already lost it. And I don't know why we're waiting until after the playoffs. Maybe that's how they have to do it, but it's a wrap. NBC's getting it. Just telling you. It's done. Warner Brothers Discovery is going to lose, according to Bill Simmons, who is a pretty connected source when it comes to...
Does Bill Simmons have any friends that might clue him in on that?
I don't know. Has he ever had any guests that are really in touch with the...
Let's not source guess. Let's not source guess. Okay.
But yeah, that's his thought. And probably a lot. It's interesting to see David Zaslav is either going to come out of this looking brilliant 5 years from now of all that they have saved, or he's going to really wear this one of losing the NBA and some of the choices he has made over the last 2 years. One of the most famous comments I think that will be attached to him was publicly stating, we don't need the NBA. And it looks like that comment keeps Adam Silver up at night, and this is his redemption. And I guess that's going to be the big question here is, and by the way, WBD did hold their upfronts earlier today, and their head of sports, Luis Silberwasser, stated that the company looks forward to another season with the NBA and reaching an agreement that makes sense for all parties.
Well, there's one more season left on the current deal.
That is true. So they have that season, and will there be any others to follow is the question. But I mean, David Zaslav had thrown out this idea that they're matching rights because they cannot technically match the NBC offer because they don't have a network, a broadcast network to put games on. And David Zaslav's comment was, well, we could also match the Amazon deal. And from the analysts I've seen, nobody's agreeing with this. Like, that is not how the matching agreements work. You are not matching a separate package. Look at this guy. Mr. Zaslav here for the wrestling folks. But yeah, this is obviously central to kind of AEW in that losing the NBA, you suddenly have all these savings, but what does that do to the profile of your network? What you can, what carriage fees you can command, because they're getting $3 a subscriber, but a big portion of that is due to the fact that you are a portal to the NBA. So this is the most important agreement David Zaslav has ever been a part of as the head of WBD that they are in the midst of, and from a lot of smart people out there believing that they are probably going to be the odd man out in this set of negotiations.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, it opens up the speculation about if they lose the NBA, which seems kind of likely now. What are they going to bid on? I guess that UFC would be the next big one on the table. But I think, let's think about the scenario that they do renew the NBA at a high price, at that whatever it would end up being, more than $2 billion, $2.5, $2.8 billion per year. Maybe that would have led to, cost cutting. Maybe that would have made WBD less willing to give AEW a strong increase. On the negative side, it will mean no NBA games in which there are AEW advertisements happening during, and that's a nice thing. It hasn't led to AEW ratings being higher than they are, but it's nice to be advertised to a sports audience. And maybe they'll require other sports that will replace that. I mean, if they get some UFC rights, I guess that would be a decent. It's not a perfect. It's no worse than advertising to the NBA audience, I guess. But ultimately, the bigger factor in whether or not AEW is going to get a good TV deal, whether or not they're going to get canceled, is how much interest is there from outside. And I believe Fightful just reported, was it earlier today or yesterday, that the exclusive window goes into the summer, which the summer is June 20 something, right? That's the first day of summer. So that's deeper into the year than I would have guessed. I guess it could be July 1. Anyway, the biggest factor that's going to determine whether or not AEW gets a good TV deal, or how good that deal is, or how bad that deal is how much interest there is from parties outside of WBD. If you're selling your house and there's only one party interested in buying your house, you're going to have to settle for what they're asking for. If there's 2 or 3 parties interested in buying your house, you're going to get a much better deal for your house. Is Fox interested? Is Amazon Prime Video interested? I lean towards guessing that maybe you're going to see Dynamite and some streaming rights, the pay-per-view stuff, go to Max. Dynamite stay with TBS, and maybe you do see Collision and Rampage sold elsewhere. If you've looked at FS1, I don't know if you get FS1 in Canada, but by God, there's nothing on FS1. Nothing on FS1. There's some baseball sometimes. They're like replaying sporting events and stuff.
Replaying sporting events. That sounds exciting. Watching that classic 2006 game. That's what I think they do have. I
think they do have some college football, but the point is, there's plenty of open room there. I don't know if they want to spend on that at this point, but that's that. And there's an FS2 of all things. Yeah, there seems like some open shelf space there for FS1.
And the last notes here, small tie-in here, is that Netflix this morning confirming Boomer Esiason, of all people, the first, I believe, to report this, that the NFL is getting into bed with Netflix. 2 games on Christmas Day. It's a 3-season deal, and they will be announcing the NFL schedule tonight. I think this is like a big deal, especially in the U.S., the reveal of the schedule. But the timing, I think, would be very opportune for WWE to kind of receive some promotion on the back end here for what should be 2 large audiences on Christmas Day for these NFL games on Netflix, just days before they move their domestic Raw rights and many international deals over to Netflix. So this is no longer can Netflix say we are just sports adjacent. I mean, they are in the live sports business at this point, I think we can say.
This is great news from Nick Khan, right? Who quite a long time ago prophesized that Netflix They say they're not into sports until they are. They'll be into sports. And he made the first kind of sports-like deal for Netflix, right? And here we have NFL games. Nick Khan seems to love the NFL too. And it'd be great. I imagine, I would guess that there's going to be some WWE advertisements during these Christmas Day games.
Well, there you have it. It was a very busy week, so we went without a guest. We are planning to have a guest on next week, but not confirmed yet, so we won't reveal that. But we have lots, as always, to go over. Hopefully everyone is caught up now on what's going on from the Janel Grant suit, the state of Texas, and what is the state of Texas? That's the big question as well. So there you go. That is everything. Brandon, great reporting today on the Oklahoma State Athletic Commission. I encourage everyone to go over to WrestleNomics, read that full story, all of Brandon's reporting, and you can catch him Sundays at 11 a.m. Eastern, patreon.com/WrestleNomics. Subscribe to WrestleNomics, help support this type of journalism that he is doing. And myself and Wei Ting, we are going to be back postwrestlingcafe.com on Thursday. It is our monthly mailbag show. So any and all questions are welcome. And we're back tonight, 10 Eastern. Actually, I should put an asterisk next to that because Tony Khan has said there will be a significant overrun tonight.
A significant one.
Significant overrun. If that means more than 20 minutes, I'm going to fume. Okay.
That's going to break my quarter-hour spreadsheet if he does that.
Yeah, significant overrun. We're going to find out what that means. Probably in the sense of what was it that who was it that just did the quote recently about very, 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 it was Kenny Omega. He's having his diverticulitis surgery very, very, very soon. 3 varies.
Okay.
So this is what we have.
What was happening? So remember the WrestleMania announcement. Paul Levesque. That was a few days, 2 varies, I think, on that one. But if Kenny's using 3 varies, that's got to be like the next day or something.
I would think imminent, but he had stated this back on Friday. So unless he's quietly, I mean, you can have surgery quietly. You don't really have to broadcast it to everybody, but we had 3 varies there and a significant overrun tonight. So we will be starting significantly after 10 p.m. Eastern tonight, youtube.com/postwrestling. Thanks for everyone tuning in today for Pollock and Thurston, and we'll be back next week as always. Goodbye.